We are streaming live tonight through Zoom and through YouTube, so those at home that are affected by COVID or don't want to take a chance coming out, they're also able to join us. Kind of recap where we're at this evening, so everybody knows. I want the public to be clear where council is this evening as far as the vote and obligations and responsibilities of where we're at this evening. I know there's been some misconceptions out there that the vote tonight determines if Blue Water moves forward or not, and that is absolutely not the case. So where council is this evening is Blue Water submitted a plan to build a campground over at the Grassdale Center. We went through the planning commission, went through the public hearings. It was approved by the planning commission. Final approval was given in March. Due to COVID, there was an extension granted because we actually suspended a few of the council meetings when COVID first started. So although we are outside of the 180-day rule, we're still in compliance because a continuation was granted through council. So the vote this evening before council is basically if Blue Water met the criteria outlined by the planning commission, they have to vote in favor of the plan being approved. If not, it has to be denied and go back to the planning commission based on the merits of it did not meet that criteria. As of the last meeting, it was the recommendation of the city solicitor and our city engineer that that criteria was met. But council still wanted some more time to review the material on their own. It's pretty clear in our code how we have to handle these situations. We do have boards and commissions established by the public. So there is community input. So mayor and council does not make all the decisions when it comes to the city. So planning commission did their job, and now it's up to council to review the material and take appropriate action. So having said that, I will open the floor to council for discussion for item number 1, which is vote on the Blue Water Campground site plan.
Yes, I have a couple of questions for our city solicitor. Has Blue Water met all the requirements through the planning commission, through all the agencies? They specifically asked for approval from Plus. Did they meet all those?
Yes, Blue Water has met all of the Delaware City code requirements.
I didn't say Delaware City code.
I understand, let me follow this. I answered your question. I understand that you asked Plus.
Yes.
Plus comments or recommendations at the beginning of a planning process. Plus, the plus letter or recommendation to be considered as it goes through that process. There's not a legal obligation to meet any of those requirements, but as you go through the process, you deal with the various agencies that require approval. That require approval. Those comments are to be taken into consideration, and that's what occurred here. So, a plan under Delaware law cannot be denied for non-compliance with what's in the plus letter. So that cannot be a basis upon which the plan can be denied. So I want to make that very clear. I know there's been questions raised about the plus and its impact here. I do also want to point out that the planning commission also addressed issues about plus at one of their meetings. And what they said is that the plus comments should be enforced to the extent that they're legally required to be enforced. And that's very important. That comment that's actually in the minutes of that meeting, because that is the question. Is there a legal requirement to meet any of these recommendations? The answer to that is no. So they have met all the Delaware City requirements. They did go through the plus process that is required. And they've met their obligations under state law regarding the plus process.
I'm going to take over. Can you hear me? Are we on? Okay. The planning and zoning approved it, and I'm gonna just reiterate what Betty said. To approve the OSPC, the plus, and the TAC. And to me, once they approved it with those conditions, that it made it mandatory as a city requirement to go forward. I understand that plus and other agencies may not do that, but in our case, our planning and zoning required that plus to be part of the condition for which they approved it. So why are we not following what planning and zoning recommended?
I believe that the requirements of planning and zoning have been met. The plus comments or recommendations that form the basis for the plan going forward. The requirement under the code is that any outside agencies that have illegally required binding decision or opinion in the matter, that has all been completed. The city engineers reviewed all the reports required by outside agencies, and they've been determined to be consistent with what's required under state law. So the plus, and I mentioned earlier when you look through the minutes of the two planning commission meetings, there are a number of inconsistent statements within those very minutes. So it is possible to look at one comment and say, they were supposed to do this or that, but then if you read them in their entirety and look at it, as I just mentioned, the plus comments, let's see.
Well, while you're looking, I did read them in their entirety. And the two of them, the first one was in March of 2019, and the other one in this year, I believe in March of 2020. Both of them still say that they have to follow the plus recommendations.
Well, on August 5th, the minutes say that the applicant shall demonstrate compliance with all legally mandated comments in the plus review letter. Well, the Delaware case law says that plus comments are recommendations and you cannot deny a plan based on that. They've met all of the legally mandated comments in the plus review letter. So they're in compliance with that requirement, and this council cannot take a recommendation that's in the plus comments and then vote no or somehow send this back based on that. You just can't do that.
See, I don't agree. And the reason I don't agree is, and I'll say it again, planning and zoning said this was part of their process for confirming approval to let this go. So in the meeting taking place last year, they made the comment. So if it wasn't going to be the case that they couldn't say that the plus, they had to follow the plus, why wasn't it brought up then, telling us, or planning and zoning, that that couldn't be a recommendation? And the same with the one in March. Why didn't the lawyer at that point tell planning and zoning that that could not be a condition? So now here we are trying to get an approval, and council here, it's a condition that planning and zoning wanted set forth in this process, and you're telling us no.
In the March 2nd, 2020 minutes, Commissioner Saunders made a motion that they recommend approval of the plan with the conditions that all other agency approvals are completed. And the motion was seconded
What section?
by Commissioner Delaware. So, and the applicant has done exactly that. The applicant has obtained the approvals from the agencies that were required to gain approval for, and the city engineer has reviewed that and seen at the last meeting they met all the requirements. So that recommendation, that motion made by Commissioner Saunders and seconded by Commissioner Delaware was voted on and passed. All were in favor. So they met that requirement. I understand that Plus did comment on this, and I know that Plus has come up, but looking at the
Plus is an agency as well.
They've met those requirements.
See, Plus is an agency as well. So when you read that comment, they haven't.
Well, the Plus is not an agency for which you have to comply with. The Plus is strictly a recommendation. It's
I
clear.
understand that, but when our council or our planning and zoning says it's a stipulation in this approval, then it should be a mandated thing.
But please keep in mind, though, that the planning commission, when they did that, the comments in the minutes specifically state that let me just find this again, because I'm quoting this language.
Well, here it says planning and zoning approved with a condition of completion of all agency approvals to include OSPC plus intact. That's pretty straightforward.
But it also says legally mandated requirements of plus, and they've met that requirement. You can't, this plan cannot be denied based on plus comments. It just simply can't, as a matter of law. It cannot. The plus forms the basis for going forward with the various required agencies, and that has been met after a very thorough review by the city engineer.
So just for clarification, it is your legal opinion that all legal requirements have been met?
Yes.
Get back to plus. I understand your reasoning if plus stood alone.
Speak
However,
up.
planning and zoning brought it into their conversation, requiring.
Can't hear the question.
Whatever.
Do you want to repeat your question in the microphone so everyone can hear your question, please? That would be great.
I understand your reasoning if plus comments stood alone. However, planning and zoning brought them into their conversation as a stipulation for approval.
I don't, what it appears to me, from looking at the same minutes that we're all looking at that were distributed, is that plus is part of the process. They make recommendations to various agencies that, plus comments come from the agencies such as Delaware and Delaware, and the same agencies that have provided final approval. So essentially, it's the starting point. They make recommendations to look at as you go forward. But when I look at the comments from the planning commission, they also say that any legally mandated items need to be addressed. But legally mandated would be something that was followed up on with the various agencies that submitted those comments in the first place. There's no specific requirement, and I don't believe there could be, that would say that these plus comments had to be addressed individually, because even the minutes themselves didn't require that in my reading of the minutes.
And did they not become legally mandated when planning and zoning asked for them to be conditions?
Well, no, because they can't make a law, they can interpret a law, presumably, but they can't make a law. That would be making a law if they were to take that position.
So what's the point then of going to planning and zoning? Just to go and say, Delaware City has a code, says RV, go ahead, you can do an RV code, do the RV thing, with no stipulation from the planning and zoning? I mean, that seems absurd.
Well, the planning commission, I thought the minutes reflect thoughtful consideration by the planning commission, all the issues that have been raised at the last meeting, and then issues that have been raised over the last couple of weeks regarding this matter. It looks like there's been thoughtful consideration to what was presented to them. And when I look at these minutes, I don't see a conflict with the city engineer's conclusion that this plan meets the code. I mean, I can see how you can dissect this and take a sentence and try to latch on to that for supporting a position regarding plus, but when I look at the overall minutes, I don't believe that's correct. I believe that the plus is a recommendation, that the agency requirements that the planning commission expected to be obtained by the developer were in fact obtained.
Well, here's where I'm at. I don't necessarily agree with you. And I honestly think that the plus is important in this approval. Seeing that, to me, the planning and zoning wanted that as a condition. So the way I'm looking at it is to move forward, in my mind, we need to have some of these issues with plus addressed before I can approve it. So how do we get to there?
Well, I don't think you can get there, because the
Well, we
issue
got
is,
an issue.
the issue is that what plus is that when you start the process, your plan gets submitted to these very same agencies that ultimately provide an approval letter. So plus happens at the front end, something to put in place to give ideas and recommendations as you go through the process. And then what you have to do is go through the process and obtain your approval letters from those agencies. And what happened in this case is the developer went to plus on the front end, like they always do, and then you move forward from there to the comply to the extent you need to with the agencies that submitted those comments in the first place. So you can't take something that's a recommendation on the front end and say that that is somehow trumps the ultimate decision by the agencies to approve this plan. And that's what the city engineer did. The city engineer took a look at what was ultimately submitted as an approval letter from all required outside agencies. Those are the same agencies that provided comments at the plus process. But you can't take a look at plus comments and have that trump the later approval by the very agencies whose approvals are required. And the city engineer has confirmed that those agencies that submitted the plus comments to begin with approved things at the end. Therefore, that has met his requirement. We can't go backwards in time when there's a later approval that presumably incorporated those comments.
However, the letters from the different agencies don't take into account some of the questions that are posed in the plus that are important. So how do we get those addressed?
Well, those state agencies are the ones that would follow up on that. If the state agencies are satisfied with what was submitted, then they're satisfied with what was submitted. I mean, that's sort of the nature of this process. And there are some general recommendations that cover a wide span of things that don't generally get incorporated in plans, but they're put out there as comments. At the end of the day, those agencies submitted an approval letter to the city engineer who has reviewed all that and concluded that meet the requirements. I did see comments and emails regarding some things that appear not to be addressed, but the agency ultimately submitted their approval letter. And therefore, you can't go backwards and say, well, state agency, why didn't you approve that? Well, we did approve it, and we approved what we thought was necessary for consideration of the plan, and that's what they've done.
Again, I fall back on the planning and zoning, that all along, I think it was their intent, at least from their proposals and the conditions, that the plus was supposed to be followed.
Well, I think planning and zoning, though, they simply stated, I mean, right from their minutes, they recommended approval with conditions that all other state agency approvals are completed. Plus is not a state agency where you get a letter saying at the end of the process you met the requirements. It's simply not.
I understand that, but why would they include plus then if they didn't want an approval from them?
I'm sorry.
If they didn't want an approval from plus, why would they have even asked for it?
Well, because plus is
I understand
not
what
ever,
you're saying.
you never get approval from plus. Plus is never going to come back and say later in the process you approved it. Plus is at the beginning of the process. The reason why they passed the law to start the plus process in the first place is that people were saying there was no opportunity early enough in the process to raise issues, and so they would not be considered. Ultimately, they created plus, and plus is that opportunity early in the process to get some comments upon which the plan should be considered as it goes through the various approvals with the city and also the agencies that submitted an approval letter. So you're not going to get a letter from plus saying, hey, you met them. You get letters going back and forth with them commenting back and forth, but there's not an approval letter from plus.
So I'm just going to state one more time. There's certain issues in the plus program or the plus letter that I'd like to
I'm
address.
sorry, could you speak to the mic?
There's 4 or 5 different areas in the plus review, and you're saying that no one has to follow them, but I'd like them addressed before I vote on this. So how do we just ask Blue Water if they will address these before I know they don't have to, obviously you just tell me they don't have to, but in order to get a vote, I think I would like to have these addressed.
Well, I mean, I saw your point. I mean, those questions about not being addressed, none of those are Delaware City Code issues whatsoever. These are sort of like general ballpark
Your
sort of comments
environmental
that they
codes.
make. But ultimately, the approval letter for what was required for this plan was issued by DENREC, and therefore, these issues I see are here, but they're not required by Delaware City Code, number one, and number two, the agency gave its approval notwithstanding that. So there's no, you have no issue at this point on these. So I think that's.
So let me ask, so if council can't say no to this, why does it even come before us?
Well, honestly, the nature of plans, either they're by right or they're subjective. And depending on the jurisdiction, a by right plan like this plan has to be approved by you if it meets the code. And this is not uncommon. In Newcastle County, they process many plans. And many of those plans are by right plans, and they still have to go to county council for approval. And I would say the vast majority of the time, those plans get approved the first time through because the planning department has reviewed the plan as indicated that that plan meets the code. And you're right, it seems like what is the purpose of this process? But when you have a by right plan, that's just the nature of the process. Now, there are other situations where you have a rezoning, where you have a subjective component, where community opposition perhaps would be a factor, but that's not the situation that we have here. Here we have a by right situation. If it meets the code, you're obligated to approve the plan. That's just the nature of the process. I understand where you're coming from in terms of if people are opposed, how do we vote no? In the by right situation, if the plan meets the code, you're required to approve that plan. And in this case, you're right, members of council are somewhat hamstrung here because the city engineer has reviewed all these plans and reports that have been submitted. He submitted his report to you to indicate that it meets the code requirements. So it's not unlike other jurisdictions where the by right situation, you have to vote yes, unless it doesn't meet the code. And as the challenge here is that obviously the city engineer and the town manager in review of all that, and my review of all that indicates that they met the code and all of the requirements. And I do believe, despite what I think some selective comments in the planning commission, I still believe they also meet the requirements of the planning commission based on what they're required to do as far as getting outside approvals, which they've obtained.
So if we vote on this, can we have stipulations,
Do you have a condition?
conditions?
Did you say,
Can we have condition, if we vote on this, can we put conditions?
you can put reasonable conditions on the plan, yes.
And the reason I ask is in planning and zoning meetings, everyone talks about the 180 days for the campers, going from August 1st to October. And the last meeting, Blue Water said it was going to go, I think, 9 months instead of 6 months. So I just wanted to make sure that we're going to stick to the 180 days.
Well, here's where we're at on that. I mean, essentially, the 180-day rule is one that is subject to a lot of interpretation. The 180-day rule says that a RV cannot be on a particular site for more than 180 days. And that has been interpreted to mean potentially you could move a RV before the 180 days expire to another location on the same property. What I recommend that you consider as far as a condition goes is that the applicant has indicated that they are willing to have an 8-month operating period. What I recommend, and I'm not sure that I think they formally said that, but we've not seen a documentation saying that. But if you were to impose a condition that indicated that they were only to be open from March 15th to November 15th, which is what they said, I would hold to that commitment to do that because they've agreed to do that. But that is a condition, I think is a reasonable condition. They said they're going to do it, and we want to make sure that's what they're gonna do. And what they've also said is that they will not have any privately owned RVs when they're closed for 4 months. And so I think a fair condition to put on this would be that they don't have any privately owned in terms of, it's not gonna be a rental, it's not gonna be a storage property. I mean, I did see some of your comments regarding their own vehicles being there. And I think there's some conflicting statements in the planning commission minutes about, well, what's gonna happen when they're closed? And I think that what the city engineer and I have been able to confirm is that the issue is you can't be in the floodplain. So during that closed period, they cannot store any RVs or cottages, and the cottages are actually mobile cottages. They're not in the ground cottages. And that those cottages or RVs owned by Blue Water cannot be in the floodplain during that period.
Well, here's where I'm at. The March 2nd of this year's meeting, there was a note in the planning and zoning minutes that said that all the campers would be removed after 180 days. And that was from Mr. Randall. And then also from Emily, she noted that all the cottages would be removed. So is that not the fact now?
Well, unfortunately, the minutes are inconsistent on there because they also say that Blue Water explained that any one camper cannot be in one spot for more than 180 days. It can then move over one spot and stay another 180 days. So essentially, the record on that in one part says, in fact, I think it was Mr. Randall, who is not with Blue Water, and I don't know if this comment was taken exactly right. I'm not sure what was actually said, but in the minutes, it does say that Mr. Randall stated that removing all cameras after 180 days. But then 2 lines down in the minutes, it talks about Blue Water explained that any one camper cannot be in one spot for more than 180 days. So even though reading that, it appears like Mr. Randall is not associated with Blue Water, made a statement. It may not have been written correctly or may have been a mistake, but it's certainly inconsistent with what Blue Water explained, that the 180-day rule means you can't be at one location for more than 180 days. And quite frankly, I think if you put a condition on the approval to limit their operation from March 15th to November 15th, that would be very beneficial to assure that they didn't try and keep a year-round operation at the site open for business.
See, even in the 2019 plan and zoning meetings on August 5th, they stated that the campground runs from April 1st to October for 180 days. So why aren't we keeping the 180 days?
Well, that was from
How
the
did we go
earlier,
to
that was
9
from the
months?
earlier commission, that was from the earlier planning commission.
Yeah, then again, it's in March of this year.
Well, the August meeting, they talked about 100 being open for 180 days based, but that was based on an economic impact report that was submitted. I'm not sure that committed them to 180 days, but when I look at what the planning commission heard and voted on and approved unanimously, what Blue Water position was that they would be able to be open, able to have RVs on site 180 days and then move it one spot over and be open for another 180 days.
That's a year.
I mean, the issue.
No
is
one said this
definition
was
of
going to be a
site.
full-time site.
I'm sorry?
No one has said this was going to be a year-round site.
It will not be if you impose, well, they agree to this, but I think council would be wise to impose a condition that states that they can only be open from March 15th to November 15th. I mean, that would be a condition that would assure that they're not operating more than that 8-month period. And when they're closed, they can't store, another condition I think would be reasonable, that they cannot store private RVs on site. and that their RVs that stay on site when they're closed for 4 months would not be permitted to be in a floodplain. I think those would be two conditions that would be reasonable and provide protection levels for Delaware City and also for the floodplain, because they're not going to be open during that 4-month period, and that would eliminate the risk of those items being actually in the floodplain.
All right, so Kieran said that. What's council's pleasure with those two stipulations?
Well, they should put them in. We should put them in. And I think we should also put in then, that they'll offer day passes to the citizens of Delaware City. They were talking about that, they work with the community sometimes, and that's one of the.
I'm pretty sure they've already told us that they were going to do that at some level.
So how do we get all of this in writing?
Is that correct?
The question again, Mayor,
Was if you want to offer some type of day passes or discounts to the residents of Delaware City?
there'd be some kind of program for sure in place for residents.
What do you say?
You said there will be some type of program for Delaware City residents. And just for the record, hearing some of the things that were brought up for the plus review, is that something, if council takes action to approve this plan tonight with the two conditions, are the things that's in the plus review or things that you're willing to work with the city on, hearing some of the concerns you're receiving?
Again, saying,
Hearing the debate here tonight as far as some of the things that were in the plus review, although they're not legally binding and mandated and stuff like that, hearing some of the concerns from council members, if action is taken tonight to approve the site plan with the two conditions on the 180-day and the floodplain, are the other things in the plus review that are simply recommendations, are those things that you're willing to discuss and work with the city on to alleviate some of these concerns with the council members?
well, I think it's important to note that we have already acted on and listened to.
So everybody can hear. Everybody.
Yes, the short answer is yes, and I think it's in the current action that we've already taken. We took, as the city solicitor described, when you go through this process, you sit in a room and a plus review, and every agency head is sitting in a room, and that's under the plus review. There's not a separate plus meeting. That's the plus review that you go through. And each one gives a recommendation, and you take that recommendation and you go back to the jurisdiction where you're doing your project, which is Delaware City, and you kind of match it up with what the city code requires. The city code required many things in the plus review that weren't required by the city code. One of the good examples that we took from the plus review already was there was a recommendation for additional buffering. For what we added that back into the project, so there's an average of almost 110-foot buffers throughout the project. We've already reacted, just so you know, we've already reacted to that comment. And to the extent that we can act with and listen to concerns from the community, we will do so. But I think it's really important that we're all at the same meeting, which is we're not at a plus review meeting, we're at a city council meeting being held to the standard of Delaware City Code. And that's what this almost 2.5-year process has brought us to tonight, that we had to check every box based under that jurisdiction. We believe we've done that. We have confirmation from the city solicitor, the city engineer, and the city manager that we've met all. But to the extent that we can continue to work and listen to people's concerns, we're going to do that. We do that wherever we have projects.
Understood, thank you.
Can I ask one question about the buffers, that you did create a larger buffer? In terms of those buffers that were created, would you commit to not altering those buffers without city approval?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that, right, the plan is what it is as it is designed today, so there's no altering the plan without going through a whole new review process of, again, going through DENRIC, going through, possibly possibly, environmental agencies, on and on. So, I mean, we're kind of locked into the plan right now. However, as you said, we've tried to meet the buffer requirement to the extent possible per the request comments.
So so my legal position on the buffering is to create a plan that creates a buffer. And we appreciate that what the buffer is, but it certainly would be the expectation that those buffers were to change, that the city be notified before a plan change occurred. So to give council some comfort about that, can you commit that any changes to the buffers on the plan, which you're going to really technically have to do anyway, that the city be advised before any of those buffers change? Is that?
Absolutely, we're not only held to that notification to you, but to DENREC and to anybody else that's in that jurisdiction. And what's interesting to kind of note, in 1961, there was a horse track built back there. There was no buffer discussion, there was no really delineation or map set up of what the buffers are going to be. So the event that's happening, hopefully tonight we get approved, we now have an actual map that we have to follow, that everybody knows what that map is. And there's been literally a line in the sand that's drawn that we now have to meet.
Exactly, and I think I know that there's concerns about buffers. It's something that came up, and that the council could go just one step further. I mean, the plan is the plan can't be changed. If the city were to go to inspect and you weren't there, they say, hey, you come too far. But I mean, as far as the council members themselves, perhaps they may want to suggest that, just for the record, just for their own benefit, because they have concerned citizens that are worried about buffers, that certainly before any changes to the buffer were to occur, the city would be notified.
Absolutely.
Do we need to put that as another condition?
Yes.
Would that be a third? The question was, would that be a third condition?
Yes.
Okay, so that would be a third condition.
I have one question. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Who monitors the compliance of all these agencies for the work that they're doing? Did you hear that?
No, I can't think.
Okay. Who monitors the compliance of the requirements from all the agencies for this project?
Well, every agency that provides approval will be inspecting this property through the process. So even Delaware City will also be required to check on progress. It's within the jurisdiction of Delaware City to conduct inspections, but of course it'll be left to the experts as far as, DENREC and DelDOT. And so there's other agencies that will be involved. I'm sure Dave could address that as well.
With respect to the city's responsibility, the engineer will be directly involved with ensuring compliance. He's our expert, and that's what we yield to. As we go along in the meeting, if everyone could identify themselves who's speaking, so the people that are in our listening audience knows who's speaking. My name is Dave Baylor, city manager, and responding to the question. So yes, we would, as we currently do with Fort DuPont and other projects, our experts, whether it's our inspector, our engineer, would be involved in this project as it moves forward.
Yeah, Bob Malinowski. How did we get from 180 days to 8 months?
How do we do what? I'm sorry.
How do we get from 180 days to 8 months?
My feeling, what I think is that Blue Water always thought they could be year-round operation. I think that's pretty much what they thought based on the way they were reading the code. And I think that there's a question mark as whether or not it's 180, what the 180 days, what that actually meant. 180 days means that it can't be on one site for more than 20. Oh, yes, that's right. This is a bill for redundancy. So, well, even reading the planning commission comments, Blue Water thought they could be open year round. And I think the city was looking at it and trying to determine what does the term site mean. And site, does that mean you can't be within the campground for more than 180 days? Or does the site mean you can't be on a particular pad within the park? And the argument is pretty strong that what interpreting the federal law, which Delaware City law is patterned after, that the 180-day rule apply to a site as particular site within the project. They did apply for a variance regarding that, and that may have caused a little bit of confusion as to what people were thinking. Well, what if they wanted to be open, or they thought they could be open for more than 6 months, why they get a variance? Or why they seek a variance that was denied? And what that issue came down to essentially was, could they be on one site within the RV park for more than 6 months, what they were seeking, because they were trying to get a permit. They're trying to sell permits to some people for the full 8-month period. So I don't think that it ever conclusively was ever 6 months. The applicant always, go ahead.
Jim Barr from Blue Water. If I could speak to that, I think the confusion, we have to separate these two conversations. There's an ongoing conversation about 180 days as it relates to floodplain. And that got all mixed up in the P&Z discussion. It was never about the code, your code would allow for our operation to be year-round. We would be compliant if we applied for a year-round operation. We came to Delaware City with the idea of even looking at maybe keeping the pool, doing an indoor pool, keeping it open year-round. So the year-round option was always on the table based on your code. Once we got into P&Z and this 180-day issue, there was the discussion of should we ask for a variance with the floodplain administrator to get over the 180-day issue. And why that's important to us and to our customers is that if they're here for a season, our season is March 15th to November 15th, I think we're going to have to ask that customer after 180 days to move their site. And it's just not really customer friendly. It's two completely separate issues. There's the 180-day floodplain issue, and then there's the months or business hours question, which we have now, through our conversations over the last couple of months, heard that there's still concern about us being open year-round. We've stipulated, as we just agreed, that we would be open from March 15th to November.
Well, what I'm looking at is your initial presentation, and you represented the season as April 1st to October, which is 180 days.
Again, I think that the key item here is that the issue of 180 days and floodplain and hours of operation are melded into one. And I think we've lent clarity to it. It's stipulating that a note on the site plan that our camp will be open like every other camp that Blue Water owns. Why would it be different here? Is that most of our camps are either 9 or more months per year.
I just want reading what you guys represented in your initial presentation. And it states April 1st to October, which is 180.
Again, what I can speak to is what the Delaware City Code would allow for, that would allow for us to be open year-round. Again, we have now agreed to that as a condition to, or a note to the site plan that would be March 15th to November 15th.
Well, why wasn't that stated in the initial presentation? March to November.
The only thing I can comment on, going back in memory, that the floodplain, 180 days, all got melded in, and the clarity that we have now is obviously reflective of Blue Water operations. It's a single in the state of Delaware, Magic Landing. We're not open for 6 months, we're open for, say, March 15th, November 15th. North Carolina, Virginia, Maine, those are all dates.
Thank you.
All right, open the floor to the council. We're now up to 3 conditions, which is the 180-day rule, the wetland buffer, and new changes to the plan without council approval. I'll open the floor for a motion of those 3 stipulations.
No storage or no rental.
No storage, no rental.
Between 16 November and 14 March, correct?
Correct. Is there a motion?
And the buffers.
Buffer is in there. Yes.
Okay. Please stay in place if
Yeah.
they change?
No change unless it comes back to council and the 180-day stipulation, correct?
And all this be put in writing?
Absolutely. Well, it becomes part of the minutes and it's official, but it absolutely we in writing. But we need a motion first before we put anything in writing.
Okay.
What are we motioning?
Motion to approve the site plan with the following three conditions. The 180-day rule, keeping the wetland buffer intact, and no changes to the environmental plan or wetland plan without council approval.
No storage, no rental between those.
That's correct.
Make a motion.
All right, motion with those three stipulations. Is there a second?
Can I go back before we? Can I make a comment?
We need a second before we take comments and questions. Either that or Betty has to withdraw her motion. Somebody wants a second and I'll open it up to questions and comments before we vote.
I withdraw.
All right, motion's withdrawn.
Okay, with the buffers, you just said wetlands. So if there's change in the buffers and the wetlands,
That's correct. All right, Betty, you want to make the other motion again?
Make a motion.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, motion is second, roll call, please.
Councilmember Conken,
Aye.
Councilmember Buckheit,
I recuse myself.
Councilmember Barrett. Vice Mayor Malinowski.
Aye.
All right, 3 ayes, 1 recusal, motion is passed. Since that is the only item on the agenda, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, meeting's adjourned. Yeah. Six months season. Second one, maintain buffer rates and review. Third, and achieve environmental. Thank you. Nice meeting.
Likewise.
I think what we're gonna do, we got a meeting at 7:30. So I continue to plug into my laptop. So my laptop is with the screen also. Out on YouTube, we're just gonna go straight up. Facebook to Zoom. My Zoom's already set up. That worked.
Yeah.
Hey, like the first game.